Welcome, one and all, to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 168. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the first podcast of June 2021. And the first few things I've got to mention is I want to apologize for the awful sound of the last podcast. That was partly my fault and also how me and Al were recording it. The website/app we were using to record it essentially messed up our audio. For those of you who didn't hear it, essentially she came across way too loud. I came across way too quiet. It was a nightmare to fix, and there was very little I could do to actually fix it. So I'm really sorry for how it sounded, and I'm going to try and make sure that when I do have someone on the podcast via online that it doesn't happen again, but I believe I've resolved the situation. The second thing I want to mention real quick is you're probably noticing that I'm stumbling on words and sound a bit different. That is because I have a bit of a sore throat right now. The reason being I have a sore throat, and the reason I'm probably going to take a few very short breaks when I talk is because for the last week it's been incredibly hot in England. Not that much, it's been about 24 to 27 degrees. I cannot stand the heat for the most part, and I did my best efforts to essentially keep all the windows open in the house. I did that, but the problem is I wasn't wearing a lot of clothes, obviously, and when you kind of have that kind of combination, and also when you are doing things that involve you to be talking a lot, obviously the cold air does essentially hit your throat, hit your chest, and you do end up getting a sore throat. Plus, I was doing a bit of house sitting, and that required me to go and essentially get the cat or cats back in the house. So that basically meant at 11 o'clock at night, when it was cold, when I was still wearing, let's say, the summer clothes, I was essentially shouting and talking in cold air. So that's resulted in me sounding a bit different. So if my voice sounds really weird, like it cracks, or I stumble on words, or I take really long breaks more than usual, that is just because I'm really struggling to get this podcast out and to actually get the words through. So I'm really sorry once again if I sound really weird, and I'm really sorry if this is the first podcast you've ever listened to. I'm going to try my hardest to get through this podcast and hopefully make it as consistent and as fun as they usually are. But yeah, sorry for the weirdness of my voice. I know my voice is already changing again, but yeah, there isn't really much I can do about it. It's kind of just getting worse as the days go on. But here's the thing, at least I was on holiday while it happened, so there you go. Let's talk about things I did over the last 2 weeks, over the last fortnight. I didn't do too much. Most of my stuff was, most of what I did was simply just relaxing. When you work as long as I do, you don't always get enough time when you get home to get these things done. So it was a lot of just getting that caught up and spending the time to get more things out the way. But the two main things I managed to finish over the last 2 weeks was I watched all of season 2 of Peepadoo and the Super Space Friends. This is the second season to season 1, which was titled Peepadoo and the Super Fuck Friends. This is a French web animated series which is 18 plus. It's quite explicit because it deals and kind of is educational about sex and sexual orientations and other more adult materials in a very informative and comedic and ridiculous way. I would highly recommend watching the first season if you've never seen it, especially if you want to see something that's just really just out there in terms of just how it just does not give a damn. The team does not give a damn. They are making a series where there is almost nothing they're not touching. It's never too ridiculous in terms of what they do. You will most likely be shocked, and you'll probably just find it hilarious for that matter. But I don't want to spoil too much about the second season because it does take place in space. And why it takes place in space, you have to watch season 1. But it is essentially a continuation from that season. It was kick-started successfully, getting 8 episodes. All 8 episodes, in my opinion, were pretty damn solid. It's a series I don't want to talk about too much because I want to possibly save it for some kind of review or the end of the year podcast. But I would say it was really strong. I love the fact that almost every single character kind of got a shining moment. I love the fact that it really took the aspect of it being a space series or a space opera and took full advantage of essentially parodying and referencing other, space, sci-fi series in very comedic ways, like taking well-known stuff and kind of giving it a slightly more ridiculous and somewhat sexual twist in a accurate way that's still educational. They do provide some informative information and some secret messages behind what is happening. Even if the episode is as ridiculous as, it's simply referring to other, sexual acts and sexual stuff, there is always a message behind the story, even if it does come off as very stupid or silly or just referential. So it is a series that has like a nice hidden story or commentary behind it, and that's honestly why I enjoy it. And I honestly think the animation and just what they're doing in terms of just the concept behind this whole series and how it can exist, and the fact that more series like this should really be a thing, but given how media works, it kind of can't. It's almost relegated to animation, or not animation, excuse me, but web content. But then again, that's just the benefit of web content itself. Really recommend it if you have the time. It's online, you can watch it. Definitely give them support. I will say this, if they do a third season, I will definitely try and kickstart it, because I would love to see this series continue. The other thing I watched, which is a long time coming, and that is going to be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I finally sat down and watched it, and to be honest, I really enjoyed it. I still think it is a very overhyped film. I don't think it's as good as people say it is. That doesn't mean I don't like it. I really like this film. I think it's great. My two biggest complaints with this film, though, they're kind of also the two strongest aspects of this film, and that is that this film is almost too technical and it's almost like too stylistic. And what I mean by that is, it's awesome that they're able to incorporate so many styles and aspects into this film to really make it whole and work within the context of it being animation, it being a comic book film based on a comic book series. The fact that it kind of does so many stylistic choices and changes, I think is great, but it can be a bit jarring and a bit dizzying when things keep changing, and given how smooth and amazing the animation is, it sometimes can be a bit jarring, because there isn't always a consistency. Like, for example, with one concept I do like is that Miles Morales, who is the main character in this film, his inner thoughts are presented as, almost like word bubbles or word boxes, much like a comic book. That is a concept I really like, but it's a concept that is not consistent throughout the whole film. I get why it's not, but I would have liked if they did that. There's other things that pop up, like kind of the little, wham, pow, and other anecdotes that appear in comics. That sometimes sporadically appears, and I wasn't a massive fan of that. What I mean by it's too technical, a lot of people have said that they find the beginning to look a bit weird. The animation's a bit robotic. The reason why that is because Miles Morales moves at 30 frames per second, whereas other characters, more accurately Spider-Man Peter Parker, moves at 60 frames per second. When the characters meet in the film, the animation kind of comes into it and it blends a little bit better, because the other characters are moving at 60 frames. The reason they've done that, it was a choice to have it so that Miles Morales is at 30 frames because he's less experienced than Peter Parker, who moves at 60 frames per second. So it's a nice technical concept which I really love, and I would love to see more people do that, but it does make things look a bit weird visually, and this is what I mean by it's too technical. The other thing that really bothered me is the fact that some backgrounds have a almost 3D-ish CTR TV effect where it kind of looked blurred. It's fine in the background, but there was one shot where it looked like that completely, and it looked awful. It was for like 5 frames, and I don't know why that is. But other than that, everything else I actually loved with this film. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. In terms of the sequel, I'm honestly not interested in a sequel. I'm happy with them to leave it there. I know they're making it. I'll probably watch the sequel because I'm pretty interested. But I really love this film. It was a massive homage and love letter to both animation and Spider-Man. And I think the directors and everyone who worked on it did an absolutely fantastic job. So high praise about that film for me. But moving on, we have only a few trailers to talk about, because honestly, these were the only 3 that I really wanted to talk about. And the first one, which is quite possibly one of my most anticipated films in a long time of this year, technically of last year. Because lockdown happened, it didn't really get released, and that is going to be Late Night in Soho. This is the second time in a row I'm talking about Edgar Wright, and this film is just really interesting so far. Like I said, it's my most anticipated film for the longest time, and there's a lot of reasons why. Edgar Wright himself, the man has a really consistent and creative filmography. I mean, he's done films like most recently Baby Driver, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, just to name a few of the films he's done. So obviously I'm expecting, at least something good from him. Who is it? Anya Taylor-Joy. I believe I said her name correctly. Sorry, because of my voice, it may have sounded like I pronounced that wrong. She's one of my favorite actresses right now. She's in a lot of my favorite films in the past recent years. She was in The Witch or The Vivitch, however you want to pronounce that, and a couple other films as well where she's popped up. I think she's a fantastic actress, and it's nice to kind of see her in a interesting role, but also as I don't want to spoil too much in case you want to deem it a spoiler, but she's kind of like a wannabe glamorous singer from the 60s, and also maybe the villain in this, which is a very interesting role for her to play because she hasn't really played any villains, so that should be interesting if it does go down that path. Also, Thomasin McKenzie, who is another actress I really like. The other thing I seen her in more recently was Jojo Rabbit, and she was a supporting role, so it's really nice to see her in the lead role. So hopefully this kind of bigs her up and she gets a lot more attention from this. What else? Oh yeah, also the fact that it takes place in London, Soho. This is somewhere I know pretty well. Soho is where I buy most of my music and my records. It's where me and my friends usually go when we want comics and records. We're usually there. That is the only time you may ever see us, which is unlikely. But yeah, it's a place I really know, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how Edgar Wright presents it both in the past and the present, which is an interesting concept and a really odd location, but I'm looking forward to it. And this is also a psychological thriller, which if you couldn't tell from the trailer, this is a first for Edgar Wright. He's not really done anything like this, so it's going to be really interesting to see him do this, especially if he nails it, which I think, given how much research and how big of a fan he is, I think he can definitely do it, or at least come out with a very interesting and discussion-worthy film at the end of the day. It's such an interesting concept, as this is essentially a frightening time travel story, which is really unique. I can't think of too many other stories like that, and I am liking a lot of the inspiration coming from this as well. One of them is clearly coming from Repulsion, which is a 1975 film, which also takes place in England. It shares a lot of visuals. I can see, if you've ever seen that film, or even just if you just type it in, you'll see there's elements from that film that are kind of here in the trailer. The neon lighting of like pinks and reds and purples, as well as like a few scenes with like knives and silhouettes, silhouetted figures, reminded me a lot of like 1977 Suspiria. And I also got some vibes from Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue, which is, all three of those films are fantastic. So if you've never seen them, I'd highly recommend watching them either before or after Late Night in Soho, which comes out in October, which is quite the fitting release date. Overall, the filmmaking looks honestly fantastic. The visual trickery or the effects, or how they're doing it, where it seems to kind of like switch between Thomasin and Anya, is really interesting. It's so smooth, especially that shot where she's dancing and the guy spins her and she, turns into the other woman. That's really nice. And some of the shots where they're in the mirror, they're done pretty well, where it doesn't honestly look like special effects. I would possibly wager that might actually be a practical effect. It might just be both actresses acting literally next to each other or in front of each other, potentially. Knowing Edgar Wright, he most likely would try and do that, so that's pretty interesting. And some of the stage performances, I noticed the sort of like burlesque cabaret girl, like all glamour and very musical-esque. showpieces look really stylish, and it would be really cool if somehow there was a full all singing and all dancing like music number somewhere in there, which would make sense given that Anya's character is a singer. So hopefully that. But there was some interesting visuals there, like in the trailer you can see, I don't know who it is, but there's one female and she's dancing in this very lavish dress, and there's like strings attached to her, and I'm wondering if that's part of the show, or that's maybe something weird going on there. But yeah, I am really, really, really looking forward to this film, if you couldn't already tell. And yeah, honestly, when I watched this trailer and I thought about it and I made my notes on it, I had a good 7 other trailers I was going to talk about, but they all paled in comparison to this. I only got 2 other things to talk about because I think these are the only 2 worthy ones that I guess you should really check out if you haven't, and I guess maybe be excited about. Maybe not this next one though, because we are talking about the trailer for Old. It's just called Old, and this is coming from M. Night Shyamalan, everyone's favorite twist maker, and he's back at it again with honestly a decent concept. I'll say it's a decent concept. People go on a beach, they start slowly aging. It's horrific, it's frightening, it's pretty decent for a concept. It's a bit silly and a bit classic in terms of a film premise. It kind of reminds me of a B-movie concept. Just off the top of my head, I know there's a film, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I know it's a film where it's literally a bed that dissolves people, it eats people. You sit on the bed and you get eaten by it. It dissolves you. That's what this film reminds me of, films like that. If you know of any other films it reminds you of, please let me know. I love stupid films like that. Even if you want to email me, raccoon+friends@gmail.com, hit me up on Twitter, although I don't really use Twitter. Leave a comment in the comment section. Yeah, I'd love to know more of these really silly films. You know, like, was it Christine, Stephen King's Christine, The Killer Car, stuff like that. But yeah, I honestly think the problem with this film and this trailer is that he might have already ruined it by explaining too much and silly twists, because even the trailer I think is spoiling or hinting at too much. So for example, this is a film that has a ticking clock element, which is fine, that's great. But the problem with that is, with an element like that, where, you know, we're running out of time, we've got to get this done before X happens, the rules and the continuity need to be very tight. They have to be tight, because people can very easily nitpick it, and people will nitpick it, especially if it's a bad film. Now, I'm going to be fair, and I did a slight little nitpick of my own, just to kind of prove my point, not necessarily on this film, but just in general when you try and do this kind of thing. So, for example, things don't kind of seem to make sense. Now, obviously I haven't seen the film, and the trailer is edited in a way to tell its own story. But, so they find a dead body in the water. This is all in the trailer, not spoilers. This is what happens in the trailer. They find a dead body in the water. It ends up on the beach somehow. They presumably put like a cloth over it, because obviously it's a dead body, it's horrible. We get a shot where we see the dead body on the beach. Then we take the cloth off of it and it's now bones, to which one of the characters says, oh, it takes 7 years for a body to become bones. Which is odd, because it's weird, because it does make you question, is it just the water, or is it both the water and the beach? If it's just the water, anyone dry is pretty much safe. The parents shouldn't be aging, but apparently they do start aging. So I guess it's both the beach and the water, or it's neither, or it's just the beach in general, or the sand. It's very strange. If that's the case, both the children should be dead in minutes because they were in the water. And once they came out of the water, they aged. Why they stopped aging once they got out of the water, and why this woman aged or decomposed once she got out of the water so fast within minutes, I don't understand why it's not happening to the children, especially in the trailer when you can see they're not slowly aging themselves. That's a nitpick that you can very easily make, and that is hopefully something that isn't the case in the actual film. But given that I'd imagine someone like M. Night Shyamalan or the producers or whoever, they probably don't care about that. They're probably going, the concept's so good, it's so scary, people won't think about that. Which is a bit of a shame, but, you know, I don't like to nitpick, but that's just an example of why you need to have a really cool concept like this as strong as possible. It is interesting. It is an interesting concept, and it is an interesting film. There are other interesting premises as well. One that's really weird, where the one of the daughters, she becomes like, I'm guessing pregnant somehow, or like something's inside her. It's really gross how it's shown, and that essentially implies time travel. And how that implies time travel is essentially, if she is becoming pregnant, I know it sounds really weird, but like, if she is becoming pregnant, that would imply that that is something that is going to happen to her in the future, meaning that time travel is taking place because at some point she gets pregnant, which is an odd concept because then it's like immediately we know it's not the beach, it's time travel. They also kind of ruin things as well. You see like people start convulsing and twitching and turn into monsters and they're all like screaming and that. So clearly it's like some kind of monster. There's a shot where they're in a cave and it's a monster. Also the line, there's something wrong with this beach, is a really stupid line. I don't like the delivery of it. And it's definitely the kind of line that you go, well, no shit, Sherlock. Like, that just kind of seems like the kind of line they put in for the trailer. Maybe it's not in the actual film, but I doubt it. But yeah, this is one to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if it's bad. I would actually be really surprised if it's good. But that depends on like who's saying it's good, to be honest, because some people liked The Visitors, which is one of his last films, and that film was crap. It was really bad. But yeah, last trailer we're going to talk about real quick is for America, the Motion Picture. This is an animated film that's going to be coming to Netflix, and it is directed by Matt Thompson, who he wrote for, directed Archer. He's kind of done a lot of those shows like Frisky Fandango and other shows like that, so we're honestly in safe hands, to be honest. I know a couple of the producers. I think Lord and Miller, who Lego Movie, Into the Spider-Verse, they wrote, produced, and directed a lot of really good and funny films. They're behind this. They're a name to keep in mind. This film honestly looks really, really fun and really ridiculous. It reminds me a lot of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, or was it Hunter? Yeah, sorry, Vampire Hunter, as well as the story / animation that the writer-illustrator of Hellboy did called The Amazing Screw-On Head. And the reason I say that is because this is like very much a very alternate American history story, which I kind of do like these. Honestly, I think they're really fun. And this one is, you know, being as ridiculous as possible. It has George Washington. He's like a big, buff, superhero kind of guy. You have his team. You have other very iconic characters. I honestly just really love the vibe of this trailer. The animation looks decent. It looks good, I would say. I wouldn't say it's the best. It looks decent. And I'm just loving the concept behind this. I think the voice acting is pretty spot on. They got some good voice actors or actors in there. I particularly just love the line where George Washington just shouts, "What the fuck is a car?" You know, that is just really funny to me. And I'm just loving just how, I know I keep saying it, I just love how ridiculous this film is. I really hope it's good. It looks like an absolute blast. And I think we need more weird, silly, stupid films like this. Not to say, you know what I mean, like in a good way. But yeah, this is definitely a mention because I don't think this film is getting nearly enough attention as it should be, especially compared to the other two films I talked about. And I always like to throw in something that you guys probably haven't even heard of, because it would always be nice to know that I got someone into something they ended up really, really liking. But yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up the podcast for the most part. I would be amiss if I did not mention the fact that it is June once again, and it is, of course, Pride Month, to which I would love to say Happy Pride Month to everyone who wishes to celebrate it, and you have my support to everyone who falls under LGBTQ+, hence why I said at the very beginning, welcome one and all. I wanted to kind of put a somewhat appropriate and of the time / theme video for the video of the episode. So I thought what better than to mention and use Dorian Electra with the song Flamboyant. Dorian Electra is a electronic kind of pop experimental artist. They have a very interesting kind of sound, a very interesting kind of look. The best way I kind of describe them sometimes is they kind of sound like a woman impersonating how a man might sing to an extent. That's how I interpret the way they sing. But you can make up your own mind on how exactly she sings, and hopefully you guys like the song, because I think she's a really underrated artist. But yeah, in terms of next podcast, there's a few things I want to mention before we wrap this one up. Real quick, I might be doing a discussion regarding Pride Month / LGBTQ+. I might do something fun where I possibly recommend or talk about media that helped me understand or could help you, or is just very well done in terms of talking about things that affect people like that, or kind of explain it, or are just very good stories that have elements like that. Also as well, next week, which is the 12th of June, is going to be Record Store Day. So depending on what happens, and if I even go up to London for Record Store Day, I will be specifically going to Soho. I might talk about records and the records I bought. I might have a friend on this podcast who talk about records if they bought any. So there's a few things to look forward to. I'm not making any promises, but that's just some stuff that might happen. We'll just have to see. It's going to be a very busy next few weeks. So yeah, I'm hoping I can get something really cool done in general. But yeah, I guess my voice is pretty knackered. So I'm going to end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.